Welcome to the Retirement Planner Podcast, the podcast that brings clear guidance to help American families like you to navigate the journey from savings to spending in retirement. I'm your host, Don Chamberlin, a certified financial educator, and my mission for over 2 decades has been to educate and help Americans throughout our great country about their retirement planning goals. With each episode, we will tackle subjects such as Social Security, taxes, market protection, everything else you need to know to retire with peace of mind. No financial jargon, just straightforward education and real-world wisdom to help you build the retirement you've worked so hard to achieve. Join me as we explore how to help you make your money work as hard as you have. Thank you for joining the Retirement Planner Podcast. Plan before retiring, plan before taking your Social Security. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Jason L. Smith. I've known Jason for many years. He's been a longtime friend. And Jason is the founder of C2P Enterprises, which is a national holistic planning firm that has offices across the country. He's also a founder of his own financial practice that he started in Ohio in the Cleveland area called JL Smith Group, and is the author of several books, including one of the best-selling books that I know for retirement planning, and that is The Bucket Plan. We'll talk about the Bucket Plan in our second segment, Jason, but today, thank you for joining us. I've wanted to talk to you about this and share some ideas with you for a long time over the podcast. So let's get into it.
Thanks for having me, Don.
Yeah, happy to do it. So I was thinking about when I met you. Do you remember when we originally met?
I don't. I mean, I remember the time period, but not the actual event.
Yeah, I think it was back in 2010. A mutual friend of ours. We were in the same company, and I didn't know you. You were new, right? And he's like, you got me all excited. You got to meet this new guy, Jason Smith. He's going to be awesome. He's going to be one of our best offices in the country. And we were at the Ed Slott event. Now, if our listeners don't know, Ed Slott is one of the number one authorities in the country on IRAs and taxes on IRAs. And he has a group of advisors that he's teaching all these techniques to on helping to plan for taxes in retirement. And so that's where we met. I was excited to meet you then. And that was in 2010. So that was 15 years ago. It's pretty amazing. So we've partnered on some things since then, including working on this concept of holistic planning, which is something that I want to talk about right now, because that concept really came out probably in 2011 or 2012, and we started to develop it. Jason really was the one who spearheaded the idea, and I don't remember back then, Jason, maybe you can think about this, if anyone else was really doing holistic planning or using that term. I had never heard of it before at that time.
Yeah, I hadn't either. It's funny, Don, I was actually working with a client of mine in the Cleveland area. And, they were a newer client that we onboarded and took them through our process, which was, we know is the bucket plan. And, when we do that, we look at their tax situation, their financial situation, their insurance, what they have in place for estate planning and legal documents, their Social Security, Medicare. Holistically, we're looking at everything and building a coordinated financial plan that's going to encompass all those areas and have them all work together. And we had just completed the onboarding of this client and putting all of their plan in place. And they had said to me, this is, I've been going to this doctor for a few years now, and they do something very similar to you. It's a holistic doctor, a holistic medicine doctor, and they look at everything I have going on, and they coordinate, and it's like they're really looking at the whole picture holistically. I feel like that's what you're doing. You put a holistic plan in place. And I was like, whoa, that is awesome. And from that point forward, I started using that terminology. And it was actually a client who introduced it.
That's cool. I never knew the origin of it, and thank you for sharing that. So what we really had in common was we were doing some of the same things at the time. Both of us had tax practices, and it started to evolve to a lot of those other things you just mentioned. And one of the things that you brought in that I think is, when I talk to people, either the second or third priority that they're thinking about is health expenses and Medicare. And you were kind of someone who had done that for many years and brought that to us. Kind of talk about the importance of that you found in including that in a holistic plan, because many people who are general financial planners out there don't even discuss this.
Yeah, and it's such a big consideration, is how they're going to manage those healthcare costs, especially if they have a desire to retire, prior to turning 65, right? With a husband and wife, if one of the two of them is going to be under age 65, they won't be on Medicare.
Right. And
So
Cobra
there's
is
going to
really
be
expensive.
exactly. And so, that's a big consideration. And then ultimately, Medicare can be pretty confusing for a lot of people. They don't understand Part A, Part B, Part D, like, prescription drugs and how to handle all that. So we felt like it was important to be able to provide that guidance and just give them peace of mind. At the end of the day, everything that you do is about having a worry-free retirement. It's about having confidence, clarity, and peace of mind to be able to enjoy what many people will call your golden years. So it's very important to be able to provide, shepherd them, along that path and provide them the guidance and the education that they need to know that, like, it's all going to be taken care of. It's all going to be coordinated. And, that's why we do it. It's why we do what we do, right?
Yeah, so I call it the 7 pillars. I hope I don't forget one, but tax, the estate planning or legal. We just talked about healthcare and Medicare. There's investments, there's insurance, there's Social Security planning, and there's income planning. So which one of those do you think is the most popular, or why do people come to holistic planning? Is there one in particular that people really say this is what differentiates you from other people?
Yeah, I would say definitely it's the tax planning and
Yeah,
management. I had no
we're
hesitation
finding that
there.
too. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. We find people that are like, oh, I don't know how to take my Social Security. I heard there's all these different ways. Timing, should I defer? Should I take it now? That kind of stuff comes up. But I'd say that's a second place. But the first is definitely because most of the people that we work with have done a really good job of accumulating assets, right? They've worked their whole life. They've worked hard. They've accumulated. Maybe even they had a business that they've now sold, and they have a certain amount of money, and they want to make good decisions with that money. And the last thing they want to do is pay too much in taxes when they could have done things differently and paid less money in taxes legally, of course, right? And so that's the key, is like the people who have done a good job of accumulating wealth want to make good decisions on how they distribute that wealth to themselves and to their families, in retirement and upon their passing. And so that's where we find most people come to us, is for that. Get it. It's almost like a house analogy, Don, and I think you use the same analogy, but first you got to create the blueprint, right? That's step one. But then ultimately, we have to build, and we have to build the house. And so tax planning is kind of like creating the blueprint. And then tax management is once we bring all the assets under one roof and get everything coordinated, and then start creating a distribution plan that's going to be the most tax tax efficient.
So
And
yeah,
then tax preparation is like the building inspector coming in and signing off on the good work that you
right,
did.
right. So
Yeah.
there's just three main elements here, and for some this seems basic, but there's tax preparation, which really that's getting your taxes done every year, and your accountant. We look at that as that person's kind of a historian. They're taking the data from your previous year, plugging it in, and figuring out. There's not a lot of changes you can do. Once you hit December 31st, all the numbers are going to be there, and that's what it is. Then there's tax planning. This is what you do currently. Like usually before you're retiring, you're going to want to do this, and you do that planning for now and for the next couple of years. And then there's tax management. And when we look at tax management, this is what might happen someday down the road, right? If you don't have someone who can actually advise you on that, who put a plan in and isn't looking at what's happening with the economy or the tax code or the change in the tax brackets on an annual basis, it really can hurt the amount of money that you have in the long run. And what we're finding is once we plug those numbers into a software program, it's saving people literally, if they have enough assets, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes over their lifetime if they do the right planning, especially with their qualified retirement accounts like IRAs and 401ks. So that's really one of the very key areas that what we're doing. So let's talk about income. I think this is a big question for a lot of people, and certainly Social Security, I've kind of separated into two things because Social Security planning comes first. You have to figure out what your Social Security is going to be and when you're going to take it before you can really put that number into an income plan and then figure out what your income gap is. So I know you've done some really great tools for financial planning and retirement planning professionals called income gap analysis. Can you explain how that works and the importance in a holistic retirement plan?
Yeah, I mean, things are going to be different. The first thing I like to do, the American College of Financial Services, where a lot of us in the industry go for our designations, for
Right.
example, the retirement income certified professional designation. Actually, the bucket plan is the first module within the American College. So, but one of the things that they teach there in that designation is the consumption methodology. And the fact that that can be a much more accurate way to figure out what you're going to need in retirement. Because too often people are like, oh, I'm going to retire and then I got to live off Social Security and then X dollar amount. And, or they create like a budget and they're totally guessing at how much money they're going to spend on travel and how much money they're going to spend on clothes and this. But what we've found in what the American College has found is that the more accurate way to actually do it is a consumption methodology. And what that is that's where you take the amount of money you're spending now, right? And take the amount of money that you're consuming right now, and then look at in retirement what is your work wages, right? After all the deductions of your health insurance and taxes and 401k and everything else, you're living off a certain dollar amount. And you take that dollar amount and you say, okay, at the end of the year, do I have money left over in my bank account, after tax money that like is sitting in my bank account? Is that accumulating, or am I about break even? Which one is that? Where are you? And so let's say that you're about break even, which a lot of people are. So then at that point, you know about what you're consuming on an annual basis, right? And if you're accumulating, at the end of the year, I tend to have an extra 20 grand a year each year accumulating in my bank account. Well, then you know that the amount of money you're consuming is about $20,000 more than you're receiving, right? But you kind of document that and you just say, okay, this is what I'm consuming right now. Well, now when I go into retirement, I know that I have a gap I got to fill. It's the money I used to get from work, the post-tax money used to get deposited in my bank account that I was consuming and living off of. Well, what's that going to be offset with? It's going to be offset with Social Security. Once you figured out the best way to, once you've worked with a professional and figured out the timing and the best time you're going to take that, that's going to fill some of that gap, that income gap. And then do you have any other pension or any other, income sources that are going to help fill that gap? And then from there, you basically take that amount of money and you figure out, okay, is there an excess or is there a shortfall that we're going to have to pull from our investments, right? Then that's where the tax management comes in. Should I take it from my 401k or this IRA or Roth IRA or this other non-qualified post-tax investment account? Should I do a blend so that way I stay in a lower tax bracket? That's where a lot of that, planning kind of comes in.
When do you pull money out of your qualified retirement accounts because that's fully taxable? Do you do it at the beginning of your retirement, in the middle, at the end? You leave a big taxable asset for your kids to inherit and they have to pay a lot of taxes? These are all questions that people have to answer. And I think it all starts with that income gap analysis where, like you've said, you figure out the expenses. I draw this on a whiteboard normally real quickly for clients to explain it. You figure out your expenses. You subtract out your Social Security. Again, you have to figure out when you're taking your Social Security, when your spouse is, figuring out what that total income is for a married couple. If you're married, if you're single, you can just do yourself. And then subtract a pension, which the majority of people don't have pensions anymore, or you could have other income. I mean, people have real estate too, we run into, but usually it's
Right.
just subtracting out Social Security, and then you get that income gap that you're going to have on a monthly basis, and you have to find out a good way to replace that in a tax efficient manner.
And back to the healthcare, you got to make adjustments, right? For what is there going to be Medicare costs? Is your healthcare going to be less in retirement because you go on to Medicare? All those considerations. Of course, there's government workers and teachers that might have, a different source of income, but it has to be customized to the individual. But at the end of the day, what are you consuming now? You're probably going to live a similar lifestyle in retirement, maybe a little bit more in travel, maybe a little bit less in clothes if you have to dress up to go to work, maybe a little bit less in gas money if you're doing a long commute. So you make those tweaks and then just keep living the same lifestyle. Too many people, Don, and you've seen this, they get so nervous about retirement, like they're going to have to buckle down and not spend the same amount of money. Well, in reality, you want to live pretty much the same way you do now, right? You want to live your life the way you're accustomed to and just make those adjustments, right?
Yeah, but I think there's a concern by many people that they can't do that they're going to have to cut back their lifestyle. And you and I know that the reality is most people will not have to do that. At least the ones that we're working with and we're running into, they won't necessarily have to do that. Some will, for sure, but I think the great thing about having a holistic planner is they can sit down with you and figure that out for you. How much income do you need? Where do taxes fit in? What's the Medicare cost like we're discussing? And if I do a tax strategy in early years or later years, is that going to boost my Medicare premium so I have a higher expense because I'm doing tax plan? There's all kinds of moving pieces and parts in here to do this. So the number one concern, and I've talked about this for I have for over 20 years now. It seems like it's always been the same whenever they do a study for people is running out of money in retirement. Let's kind of close this session out by, can you talk a little bit about sequence of returns risk, what that is, how it's important to include that in a holistic plan? And then in our next section, when we get into talking about the bucket plan, we'll give everybody a solution on how to solve sequence of returns risk.
Don, I think the simplest way to explain sequence of returns risk and the danger of it is the money cycle. And the money cycle is something that we all go through throughout our lifetime. You're going through it right now. I'm going through it. Every single person listening right now is going through it. And there's 3 phases to the money cycle: accumulation, preservation, and distribution. The accumulation phase is when you're younger and you're working towards retirement and you're accumulating assets and you can afford to take more risk. I mean, if you lose the investment, you can make that money back. If the market takes a big hit, you can wait for it to come back because you have plenty of time before you're going to retire. But then as you start to get 5-10 years out from retirement, you start to go into the preservation phase for a portion of those assets. Money that you need to preserve in preparation for the 3rd and final phase, which is distribution. Distribution to yourself in retirement and distribution to your family upon your passing, including your spouse. And the biggest mistake that people make is they go directly from accumulation into distribution, and they never preserve a portion of their assets in preparation for retirement. And they subject themselves to what you have talked about, Don, sequence of returns risk. And what sequence of returns risk is if there is a negative sequence of returns in the stock market where your investments are down and you start drawing and selling off those investments to live off the income when those investments are down, memorializing those losses, you can never make that money back. And so it's crucial to set up a preservation fund or bucket, right? To preserve a portion of the assets that you're going to draw from throughout that first phase of retirement.
Yeah, so I have a great money cycle story. It really caused me to get more into focusing on holistic planning because prior to when we had the dot-com bubble, which started in 2000 and went through 2002, and the market went down 49% in 3 years at that point, I was a broker, and basically I sold mutual funds and other investments, and I was all about the market and the market only. And a lot of my clients retired, and the market went down for those 3 years, and they lost money. I had no control over it. By the time we got to the end of 2001, I decided not to be a broker and start my own business. I basically went out on my own, hung up my own shingle, and had no one else working for me at that point. It was just me. But the reason I did that was because I had no control over the market going down, and I started printing off reports. We had this service called Morningstar. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Jason. And it's a mutual fund kind of a grading service and analysis service. And I looked at all of the clients' accounts of new people I was meeting and my current clients, and they were all invested in the market, mostly in all the same things. Most of them had all the top 20 largest stocks out there, and it just kept going down and going down. And they retired and thought, I'm going to be okay, because the stock market had gone up since 1982. And so by that time in 2000, 2001, it started going down. They thought it was going to keep going for a long time. And they went through the accumulation phase and thought the accumulation would continue to go. They never did a preservation, and some of those people lost half of their money. A few of them told me they had to go back to work. So this is why it's important to really follow the money cycle. Once you've accumulated, you need to have a preservation phase before you go into the distribution phase. So thank you so much for sharing this with us, Jason. We'll be having another session with you that we'll talk more about the bucket plan, which is kind of a solution for some of these issues that people who are retiring are going to face. Thank you so much for watching the podcast today. Our mission is to bring an education-first approach to help countless families like you turn their retirement dreams into reality. Have specific questions about today's podcast? Do you want to learn more about our holistic planning approach? Click the button below to schedule a call with one of our financial educators. Subscribe to our podcast and share with others who could benefit from this episode. Check out our YouTube channel for more videos on this retirement planning subject. Also, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for all your retirement planning needs. Remember, planning for retirement is a journey, not a sprint. It's about taking those critical steps today to secure your future. Until next time, keep planning, keep dreaming, and keep moving forward on the path to your confident and fulfilling retirement.